Two men commit the same crime. One spends years behind bars. The other hires the best lawyer in town and walks free. In America, you cannot legally drink until 21. In Germany, 16 is enough. So which version of justice is real? From childhood, you were told the story. Justice is blind. The law is equal for everyone. The good will be rewarded. The bad will be punished. And the scales will always balance in the end. But look closer. The same action that condemns one man is tolerated in another country. The same law that ruled yesterday can be rewritten tomorrow with a new election. If justice is absolute, why does it shift with borders, with rulers, with time? This is where the first crack appears. The belief that justice is eternal and unchanging is not a truth. It is a myth powerful enough to control whole societies. Because once you accept that justice is always fair, you stop questioning who defines it. You stop asking whose interests it really serves. Aristotle saw this centuries ago. He argued that justice is never a single truth. It is a principle of distribution shaped by context, by power, by purpose, and that means it can never be perfectly fair. This is not a small detail. It is a revelation. It means the justice you were promised is not a universal law written into nature. It is a human construction, fragile, changeable, political. So the question is not, will justice prevail? The question is, whose justice are we talking about? The one written in your constitution, the one interpreted by your judge, the one enforced by your rulers. And if that is true, then justice was never blind. It always had eyes. It always had hands. It always served someone. Maybe it was never about absolute fairness at all. Maybe it was only ever about distribution. Who gets what? Who pays the cost? Who benefits when the scales tip? And once you see that, another question cuts through the illusion. If justice is not absolute, if it is only a shifting principle of distribution, then what exactly have we been believing in all along? From the beginning, you were given a story to believe. Justice is blind. The law treats everyone equally. The scales always find balance. It was repeated by teachers, judges, and leaders. It was carved into the slogans of nations. It became a moral lullaby that you sang to yourself when life felt unfair. The idea that justice is eternal, sacred, and absolute. But that idea was never innocent. It was a design, a construction carefully placed into your mind to make you obedient. Why? Because societies cannot survive if everyone doubts the fairness of the rules. A government cannot function if citizens see law as nothing but power dressed in words. People need to believe in fairness even when it does not exist. They need to think the game is honest even when the dice are loaded. Psychologists have a name for this: the Just World Fallacy, the conviction that good deeds will eventually be rewarded and bad deeds will be punished. It makes the world feel predictable. It explains suffering without forcing you to question power. It gives comfort to those at the bottom, even when the system has no intention of lifting them up. Think about how often you have heard it. Work hard and you will succeed. Be honest and you will be respected. Do good and life will return the favor. But how many workers died poor despite decades of labor? How many honest men were silenced while liars thrived? How many noble acts disappeared without reward? The belief itself is the trap. Because if you think justice is automatic, you will not resist. You will not rebel. You will not even complain. You will endure, trusting that the scales will tip back on their own. And so injustice becomes easier to maintain. A workforce convinced that patience will pay off does not strike. Minorities convinced that fairness will come in time do not revolt. Citizens convinced that corruption will punish itself do not hold the powerful accountable. This is why the myth is so dangerous. It does not just deceive, it disables, it paralyzes. Aristotle understood this. He saw that justice is never absolute. It is always contextual, always relational, always shaped by power. And yet rulers of every era have repeated the same story. They must, because a society that does not believe in justice would demand change. And change is the one thing the powerful cannot afford. So the question is not simply, is justice fair? The deeper question is, why were you told that it was? Whose interest does this belief protect? Whose power does it sustain? Because once you see that justice was never absolute, the illusion shatters. And once it shatters, you face a choice. Will you keep pretending the story is true? Or will you finally open your eyes to the machinery behind the myth? If justice were truly blind, the strong and the weak would stand on the same ground. But they do not. They never have. Look closely at the courtroom. The law may claim neutrality, but wealth tilts the scales before the trial even begins. One defendant can afford a team of lawyers, expert witnesses, and endless appeals. Another can barely pay for a public defender. Both committed the same act. Both face the same statute. But their outcomes are worlds apart. This is not an accident. It is the natural consequence of human inequality. Aristotle called it physis, the differences given by nature and circumstance. Some are born with health, talent, or wealth. Others are not. And when the law enters the picture, it does not erase those differences. It amplifies them. Sociologists call this the Matthew effect. The rich get richer. The powerful grow stronger. The advantaged accumulate even more advantage. In the justice system, this means the people most capable of bending the law are the ones least in need of its protection. Meanwhile, those who need fairness most desperately are the least able to secure it. Now extend this beyond the courtroom. Think about legislation itself. Who writes the laws? Who lobbies for them? Who has the resources to influence the language of statutes and the priorities of enforcement? It is rarely the powerless. It is those with assets to defend. Corporations with armies of attorneys. Politicians with careers to protect. This is why history repeats. In ancient Athens, slavery was legal because it served the interests of landowners. In modern democracies, tax loopholes exist because they serve the interests of corporations. The pattern is the same. Justice, as written into law, bends toward those who already hold power. And yet, the illusion persists. We are told the law is the great equalizer, that in the eyes of justice, rich and poor are the same. But every case, every statute, every amendment tells a different story. The paradox is clear. Justice promises equality, but it is delivered through systems built on inequality. It promises neutrality, but it is shaped by interests. It promises fairness, but it rewards those who can afford to tip the scales. This is why justice always tilts, not because the principle itself is corrupt, but because it is carried out by human hands, hands that are never neutral, hands that belong to rulers, to lawmakers, to judges shaped by their own biases and beholden to their own interests. And here is the bitter truth. When you look for justice in the real world, what you are often seeing is not fairness. It is power, dressed in the costume of fairness. So when you hear that justice is blind, remember this. She is not blind. She is looking straight at whoever holds the purse, the sword, or the throne. For Aristotle, justice was never a single, unshakable truth. It was not a law written into the stars, the same for every place and every time. It was something far more human, and because of that, far less perfect. He began with a bold claim. Justice, he said, is the highest virtue, but only in relation to others. Justice is complete virtue, he wrote, but not absolutely only in relation to others. A man living alone in the wilderness has no need for justice. Justice only exists in community. It is a social virtue. It governs how we live with one another, not how we live in isolation. From this starting point, Aristotle divided justice into two great forms, The first is distributive justice. The second is corrective justice. Distributive justice is about how society divides its rewards, responsibilities, and resources. And here is where Aristotle shattered a comforting illusion. He did not think fairness meant equality. He did not believe everyone should get the same. For him, fairness meant proportionality. Each person receives according to merit, contribution, or role. Think of it in practice. A soldier who risks his life for the city deserves greater honor than the man who never fought. A wise leader deserves more authority than a foolish one. This, for Aristotle, was justice, not to each the same, but to each his due. This idea still shapes the world today. Scholarships for the talented, higher pay for the skilled, awards for the exceptional. But it also creates tension, because someone must decide what counts as merit. Who decides which soldier was braver? Who decides which worker contributed more? That judgment is never free from bias, and it opens the door to power-shaping fairness itself. The second form was corrective justice, where distributive justice is about dividing benefits. Corrective justice is about repairing harm. When one person wrongs another, the scales tilt. Corrective justice tries to restore balance. Here, equality does not mean proportionality. It means arithmetic. 10 stolen must be 10 returned. A wound inflicted must be compensated by care or payment. The goal is simple: undo the imbalance. This form of justice is the foundation of modern law. Court orders, compensation, damages, imprisonment, all are attempts to restore equilibrium when it has been broken. But here too lies a flaw. Some losses cannot be repaid. No amount of money can restore a lost child, a ruined reputation, a broken life. Corrective justice can only patch the wound. It can never erase the scar. Beyond these two forms, Aristotle also distinguished between natural justice and legal justice. Natural justice, he argued, is universal. Killing the innocent is wrong everywhere. But legal justice is not universal at all. It changes with rulers, cultures, and constitutions. The drinking age, the definition of theft, the rules of inheritance, all are written by humans, and they shift with time. This means that most of what we call justice in daily life is not eternal law. It is legal convention, and convention is fragile. To solve this fragility, Aristotle introduced a final idea: epieikeia, or equity. Equity is the recognition that no law, however carefully written, can fit every case. Sometimes rigid rules produce absurd outcomes. Equity is the adjustment, the bending of the letter of the law to serve its deeper spirit. It is justice correcting justice itself. So what does all of this mean? It means that justice, for Aristotle, was never about perfection. It was always about principles of distribution and correction. It was always about human judgment, not divine command. And because it depends on judgment, it is never absolute. It is contested. It is biased. It is fragile. The point that Aristotle forces us to see is uncomfortable, but liberating. Justice is not the promise of equal shares for all. It is the messy process of trying to balance human lives in proportion to their roles, their actions, their harms, and their circumstances. It gives us order, but never perfection. It gives us stability, but never true fairness. And once you see justice this way, you understand why it will always tilt, why it can be twisted, and why the illusion of its perfection must eventually collapse. Justice is often celebrated as the highest of ideals. The word itself sounds pure. It promises order, balance, morality. But Aristotle forced us to see its shadows. The first shadow is this: justice serves the community, not the individual. A single man can be sacrificed if his suffering preserves stability for the many. You see this every day in policies that benefit the majority but crush the minority. Entire neighborhoods displaced to make room for highways. entire groups drafted into wars they did not choose. The pain of the few is accepted as the cost of order for the many. And we are told this is justice. The second shadow is political. Aristotle knew that every form of government claims its own version of justice. A monarchy calls it the will of the king. An aristocracy calls it the wisdom of the few. A democracy calls it the voice of the people. But strip away the slogans and you see the pattern. Justice bends to whoever holds the throne, the council, the majority. It is never neutral. It is never free from power. History makes this plain. Slavery in ancient Athens was legal and therefore just. Segregation in modern America was once legal and therefore just. The law declared it so and people obeyed. But legality did not make it moral. It only revealed how easily justice can be twisted to serve those who write the rules. And this leads to the third shadow. Justice does not always align with morality. A law can be legal but evil. A law can be broken yet righteous. Hiding refugees was illegal under tyranny, but who would dare call it unjust? Owning another human was once permitted by law, but who would dare call it moral? This is the paradox. We want to believe justice is identical to goodness. We want to believe the law is the guardian of morality. But history shows us they diverge again and again. And when they do, justice as written becomes the mask of injustice in practice. So what does this mean for you? It means that obeying the law is not the same as being just. It means that trusting the system is not the same as living morally. It means that the very thing you were told to revere as sacred can be corrupted, twisted, weaponized. The dark side of justice is not just that it fails to be fair. It is that it can be used to legitimize unfairness, to dress exploitation in the costume of legality, to make oppression look orderly, rational, inevitable. Aristotle saw through the illusion. Justice is never absolute. It is always tied to context, power, and purpose. And once you recognize its shadows, you realize the truth. Justice is not the opposite of injustice. It can be its disguise. If justice is not absolute, if it bends to power, if it can even mask injustice, then why do people still believe in it? Why does the myth survive? Why do entire societies cling to the idea that justice will always prevail? The answer lies in psychology, in the way the human mind craves certainty, in the way crowds need stories more than they need truth. The first story is the Just World Fallacy, the belief that the universe itself is fair, that hard work will always be rewarded, that cruelty will always be punished, that life has a built-in balance sheet, keeping track of every deed. This belief comforts. It makes random suffering easier to accept. It convinces the poor that their patience will one day be repaid. It convinces the oppressed that history will bend toward them without struggle. It convinces everyone that the system will eventually correct itself. But comfort is not truth. The Just World Fallacy is a narcotic. It soothes you into obedience. It tells you to endure injustice because someday, somewhere, the scales will tip back in your favor. The second story is equality bias. Humans want to believe that everyone is the same, that ability, intelligence, and opportunity are evenly distributed, that the rules apply equally to all. But reality does not reflect this. Differences in birth, wealth, health, and education create enormous gaps. Aristotle called it physis, the inequalities built into nature and circumstance. Yet people cling to the illusion of sameness because it feels democratic, it feels hopeful, it feels safe. The third story is manufactured. It is created deliberately by rulers, institutions, and media. Equal opportunity for all. Liberty and justice for everyone. These phrases are repeated until they feel like truths. But they are not truths. They are instruments. They keep populations governable. They prevent dissent. They transform obedience into patriotism. Consider how these illusions function in daily life. The worker who believes justice is guaranteed does not strike when wages stagnate. The citizen who believes corruption will punish itself does not demand reform. The minority who believes fairness will come eventually does not revolt when discriminated against. The illusion is useful, not to the individual but to the system. It keeps the wheels turning. It keeps the powerful secure. It keeps injustice manageable by disguising it as temporary, correctable, inevitable. And this is why the myth of absolute justice has survived for centuries, not because it is true, but because it is convenient, because it pacifies, because it tells people what they want to hear, that life has order, that suffering has meaning, that fairness is guaranteed. Aristotle shattered that comfort. He saw that justice was never eternal, never absolute. He saw that it always depended on who was distributing, who was correcting, who was ruling. He exposed the illusion long before psychology gave it names. But the question is, will you? Will you keep living inside the story because it feels safe? Or will you step outside of it and see justice for what it is? A fragile human invention, powerful, necessary, but never pure. Because the greatest illusion is not that justice exists, it is that justice was ever perfect. If justice will never be perfect, if the scales are always tilted, then how should you live? Do you surrender to cynicism? Do you give up and say nothing matters? Or is there another path? Aristotle believed there was, but it was not the path you were taught as a child. It was not about waiting for the system to rescue you. It was about shaping your own life within an imperfect system. The first step is to redefine fairness. Stop thinking of it as identical outcomes. That illusion will destroy you. Fairness, in Aristotle's view, was not about sameness. It was about proportion. It was about giving each person what is due to them, relative to their role, their effort, their capacity. That may sound disappointing at first. It may feel like another way of justifying inequality. But look deeper. What Aristotle was pointing to was not surrender but responsibility. If you cannot expect perfect fairness from the outside, you must demand proportional fairness for yourself, not by waiting, but by acting. This brings us to telos. Aristotle believed every human being has a telos, a purpose, a natural end. The oak tree is the telos of the acorn. The flourishing citizen is the telos of the child. Your task is to discover your telos and to live in alignment with it. Because when you live according to your true purpose, you stop measuring yourself by someone else's scale. Next is arete, excellence. Aristotle argued that the good life comes not from equal shares, but from cultivating excellence in your own nature. Do not wait for justice to hand you what you deserve. Become so skilled, so disciplined, so sharp in your character that you can demand your share. Excellence is leverage. It tilts the scales in your favor without begging for them to be level. And then comes a hard truth. You must learn to choose your arena. If the system is not fair, do not play in every game it offers. Find the places where your telos and your arete can create the most advantage. This is not cynicism. It is strategy. It is refusing to let an imperfect justice decide your worth. What does this mean in practice? It means you stop waiting for the world to become fair. You stop expecting institutions to suddenly balance the scales. You stop clinging to slogans about equality and start measuring your life by alignment with your purpose, cultivation of your strengths, and the choices you make about where to fight. This is the real escape from illusion, not abandoning justice altogether, but refusing to worship it as a god, not expecting perfection, but demanding proportion, not dreaming of fairness, but building excellence. Aristotle never promised a just world. What he offered was a way to live meaningfully in an unjust one. And that is more powerful than the myth you were told, because the myth makes you passive. But his philosophy makes you active. It makes you responsible. It makes you free. So ask yourself, will you keep waiting for the scales to balance? Or will you sharpen your own edge, discover your own telos, and live with the kind of excellence that no flawed system can ignore? Because when justice is never truly fair, the only escape is to stop chasing perfect fairness and to start building the strength to live without it. Justice will never be truly fair, not in Athens, not in Rome, not in your modern democracy, because justice is not eternal law. It is a human construction, fragile, changeable, shaped by power, rewritten by rulers, bent by context. You were told justice is blind, but it was never blind. It always saw who held the purse. It always saw who commanded the crowd. It always served someone. You were told fairness was guaranteed, but fairness was never guaranteed. It was proportional. It was conditional. It was political. This is not a tragedy. It is an awakening, because once you abandon the illusion of perfect justice, you stop waiting for the world to correct itself. You stop living as if the scales will tip on their own, and you start living with clarity. Aristotle's lesson was not to despair, but to redirect. Do not seek equality in outcomes. Seek alignment with your telos. Do not wait for fairness to arrive. Build arete, the excellence that tilts life in your favor. Do not chase the fantasy of absolute justice. Pursue proportion. Pursue strength. Pursue freedom. And now the choice is yours. Will you keep playing your part in the myth? Will you keep waiting for the system to save you? Or will you accept that justice was never perfect and live in a way that does not depend on illusions? Justice will never be truly fair, but maybe that is not the point. Maybe the point is whether you will see through the story and decide what to do once the illusion is gone. So ask yourself one last question. Do you still believe in the blindfold? Or will you open your eyes and live with the clarity that only comes when the myth dies? Leave your thoughts below. I read every comment. And if you want to keep exploring the hidden patterns shaping our lives, make sure you subscribe and stay curious with us here at ThinkMate.